everybody, so today's video is going to be my wrap up for March, all the manga I read in this month. So in March I read 61 volumes of manga, I believe, and it's kind of interesting because I only read 15 days out of the month. There were 15 days where I didn't pick up a single thing, I didn't read a single book, and yet somehow I managed to read 61 volumes of manga, which makes me wonder if I did have the motivation to actually read every day, how much could I actually accomplish in terms of reading in a month? I don't know. I feel like it'd be a lot more though. And then maybe my TBR would actually go down instead of going up. I actually only have 5 series to talk about. One of them was very long, which is probably, it's more than half of what I read this month. So the first thing I read was Ajin. I read from volume 2 through volume 16 is the most recent one that's out in English, but I completed the series on the Crunchyroll app. And I had previously read the first 12 volumes of the manga, so I reread volumes 2 through 12 and then finished the rest of the series. So I really enjoyed this series. I find the characters very interesting. There are some that I like better than others, but for the most part they're all fascinating and they all have their own drives and they all have their own issues that they deal with throughout the course of the series. The antagonist especially is seriously the most interesting antagonist I've ever read in a manga before, maybe in all of fiction that I've read. He's just very fascinating. Might not be what you're expecting if you've heard about this series, but he is very interesting to say the least. I have recently heard some people complain about the main character and his, I don't know, decisions throughout the series, but I never had that issue. I haven't had a single issue with the main character. He's not my favorite protagonist I've ever read, but there was nothing particularly wrong with him, in my opinion. And I think the only other thing I'd like to mention when it comes to the series is the art style. The art is really, really cool. Especially the color pages they give you at the beginning of the series. It's very difficult to see, but in person, I don't remember which volume it is, but there's one color page in there that looks so cool. The way that the author plays with the background and perspective is really interesting to me. And of course the series is very violent, so all the gore is in pretty high detail. If that's going to bother you, just to let you know, that is a factor in the series. But I never had a problem with that, and I think this series is really fantastic. I think I gave it an 8 out of 10, but yeah, it's pretty good. Oh, one other thing I will mention in terms of like the collector's view of this series, people say that this series is very thin, so it's not worth the money, but this is pretty much the length of a regular manga volume. It's about 192 pages, which is normal for a manga volume. I think the paper's just thinner, but it doesn't feel like it's low quality. The paper is fine. I never had a problem. Like, these volumes are also kind of small, but it never felt like an issue. The art never seemed like it was too small to see what was going on. And that could be something to say about the actual art rather than the book itself, but I never had a problem reading these volumes, and I don't really think that it's a waste of money for this volume. I think it's really good. And in my March TBR video, I mentioned that I wanted to read a couple Junji Ito books, and the first one I got to this month was Remina. So, this is just typical Junji Ito. It's very strange, doesn't really make a lot of sense, but the art is fantastic. That's pretty much the same thing you can say about every single Junji Ito book. When I was reading this, at first, I really, really didn't like it. I thought the story was so stupid, and over the top and ridiculous, which is typical for Junji Ito stuff. But I don't know, I just really didn't like this. And then there's this one panel, which I don't want to show you, because it's kind of spoilery, but it made me think, wow, this is like some trippy nightmare, right? It just feels like something I've dreamt up before, like when I'm sleeping, and it just kind of stuck with me. And then after reading that part, I read the rest of it as if it was just like someone's really weird nightmare, which I know Junji Ito has written things based off of his nightmares before, and I wonder if this is one of them, because it really did feel like a weird, like not quite reality dream. Obviously it's not reality, and there's no way in anything it could ever be realistic, but it did make me think of a dreamland, kind of. And then I actually enjoyed it a lot more after I was thinking of it like that. So, yeah, I'm sure many people have complained about this, and I definitely see that. I don't think it's definitely not for everyone. In fact, I'm not even sure it was for me, but just the weird, like, kind of epiphany I had while reading this was interesting, if nothing else. And the next series is what I spent the majority of the month reading, at least in terms of the sheer number of books. So I read the entirety of Eyeshield 21, so from volume 1 through volume 37. I read the entire thing this month. I don't remember off the top of my head how many days it took, but it wasn't very long. So I've heard some people describe this as one of the best sports series ever. I really cannot agree with that. I did really enjoy it for the most part, but it doesn't come close to some other series I've read before. Not that we should be comparing all sports series, but I just had to comment on that personal opinion. My main problems with the series are especially the pacing. I feel like the pacing is way, way, way too fast. And you'd think 37 volumes, it'd be too slow, right? But I feel like it's way too fast. There are some games that take like a chapter or two to complete, and it doesn't leave like any satisfying ending. It's just like, yep, this is the game. This is how it ended. Next one, let's go. And because of that, to me, it felt like the authors were trying to show new antagonists. Like, here's a new team that our main team has to go up against. Here's how they're evil or whatever. Here's what they're really good at. And then it's a really good thing when our main team beats them, right? It feels good, right? However, I feel like a lot of that time should have been spent developing the main cast, because other than the main character, Senna, and then the third years, and then Manta, that's pretty much the only characters who get development, and I feel like that's really not enough, because there are more characters on this team that there was ample time to give them development. It just, like, they never got development. Maybe they get one chapter throughout the entire series that's focused on them, and then they're left alone. And there's one character I feel like didn't get development at all. So that was a really big kicker for me, pun not intended, with this series. The other one being the ending. I did not care for the ending at all. It wasn't bad. And I don't think other people would have the same issues I had with the ending. I just didn't care for it. It was not what I'm interested in when I read a sports series. But I'm sure some people would like that. And before I get people in my comments saying that I just don't like this because I don't watch football, football is my favorite sport. I watch football all the time. I've watched football for years and years, more than half my entire life. So it has nothing to do with me not liking football, because that's just not true. But for the most part, as much as I'm complaining about it right now, I did enjoy the act of reading it. I just had quite a few issues with it. So I ultimately ended up giving this a 7 out of 10, which is not a bad score for me at all. That's a pretty average score, which I feel like this is a pretty average series. So that's what I gave it. And I did really like some of the development of the main characters, especially Kurita. And the three third years had the most interesting development for me. And then, of course, I like Manta because he's funny. But other than that, I really did feel like the series was lacking something, even as enjoyable as it was. And that's why it couldn't become one of my new favorite things. But I will have a video up, I don't want to say soon. It will happen, this series will appear in later on. So we'll see when that happens. But you might be seeing this again maybe soon. And then I continued my Junji Ito journey with Uzumaki, which is probably his most iconic work, I think. And I really did enjoy this one. It's a lot more than Remina and a lot more than some of his other series like Gyo. I hated Gyo. But Uzumaki was really good. This one is just like a collection of short stories, but it does take place in the same town around the same theme. So it's kind of episodic, but kind of not, because it does continue a theme. And this town does change throughout the short stories until the end, where there's an actual conclusion of the whole entire collection of short stories, which is interesting. I really liked that way of storytelling, and I found it very fascinating. And of course, Junji Ito's art is always really good. In fact, I think it's interesting that this is one of his early works, but I feel like this is the best Junji Ito art I've seen so far throughout all the things I've read of his. I will admit that Junji Ito definitely has some same face syndrome, especially with his female characters, but that didn't affect me when reading this. It's just usually like, you'll read another Junji Ito series and you're like, yeah, this character looks exactly like the series, or the character from another series or something. But that didn't affect my enjoyment of this book in particular. And yeah, this was sufficiently weird and creepy. It wasn't necessarily scary, but I can't really find any horror manga that actually scare me. But it was interesting enough for me to really like it. So I'm glad I read this one this month. And then the final thing I read this month was volumes 1 through 7 of Requiem of the Rose King. So this is a shoujo manga, and I have been trying to branch out into shoujo manga a little bit more. So I heard good things about this one. I heard it was like an action series, so I picked it up. I tried it, and it definitely has lots of action and gore and violence, right? But I liked it. I did like it. However, It's not my favorite thing in the world, and I do have some issues with it. But first I'll start with the positives. One, I've never read an intersex character before in manga, and I'm not sure I've seen an intersex character in any other types of fiction either. Now, I can't particularly comment on the representation of the intersex character, but he is the main character. He is treated very terribly, especially by his mother, because he is intersex. And some of the main issues he has throughout the series have to do with that aspect of him. And I thought those were the most interesting parts of this series so far. I've read 7 volumes, like I said, and I have quite a few more to read. So we'll see how that continues. In terms of the rest of the series, though, I did feel like it was very, very melodramatic, which I guess makes sense for Shakespeare, but it was very melodramatic. And I didn't know that this was basically a harem manga, which it didn't really bother me. It was just, like, not what I was expecting. There's a lot more romance in here than I usually look for. It didn't bother me. But I haven't heard anyone else mention that this is basically a harem manga, which it is. Richard has, like, more than 3 people, potentially, who are romantically interested in him. So I think that's the definition of a harem, which is fine. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. It does, however, allow for some very, very melodramatic moments, which I wasn't necessarily a fan of, but it's not particularly bad, and maybe you will like that. The other thing I thought I'd mention is that I have read some reviews of this series where people say it's confusing, and I can understand why people would say it's confusing, because there are lots of characters, and some of the characters have the same names. Like, there's 2 Richards, there's 2 Edwards, it's kind of, and then characters have more than 1 name, so it could be kind of confusing, but I personally was never confused. When they said Edward, I knew exactly what character they were talking about. I never had that issue where I didn't know who they were talking about or what was happening. And the only other thing I think I have to mention, I'm not sure I've fully formed my opinion on this. Maybe when I continue the series, I'll have better thoughts about this. But for now, the female characters are very interesting because for the most part, they're just evil, right? There's one character who's not, but for the most part, they're just evil, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. And, I mean, you can go ahead and say, like, oh, they're representing the female characters as all evil, so women are evil, blah, blah, blah. I don't think that's what's going on here, okay? In fact, I kind of like reading about evil female characters, even if they're all evil. And, some of the characters are evil in different ways. Like, there's Richard's mother, who is straight up evil and a terrible human being. There's another character, the queen, right? She is evil because she's frustrated and she just wants to rule, which I find her character very interesting. And then there's another character who is set out for revenge. So she's not really evil. She's definitely an antagonist, but I wouldn't say she's evil. So all the female characters who people say are, oh, all the female characters are evil, they're all different. And I think that's enough for me to like them. But anyway, I think that's it for my thoughts on the series so far. I am interested to see where it goes as I continue reading. I am enjoying it though, and I find that Aya Kano's art is fantastic and very beautiful to look at while I'm reading. So yeah, I'm not regretting my time with this, even though I did complain about it. I do think it's very interesting and good, actually. It just wasn't quite what I was expecting, which isn't bad. It's just a factor of my reading experience. So anyway, that's going to be it for this video. Thank you guys for watching. If you have any thoughts on anything I had to talk about today, please leave those in the comments. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. Bye!